Hello, welcome to this series of lectures on financing and fundraising for tertiary institutions in Sub-Sahara Africa. In doing this, we will be looking at various methods of fundraising and financing that would more or less meet the needs, the financial needs, the infrastructural needs, and other needs in kind of tertiary institutions in Sub-Saharan Africa. As it stands today, there are over 650 public universities in Sub-Saharan Africa, and we can just imagine that the private universities have also joined in the tally to a very reasonable extent. And what we have today is an attempt by the tertiary institutions to bring about some level of impactful development on their various spheres and countries, through producing graduates of great educational accomplishments, so to say. Now, very quickly, I just want to start by saying that in establishing a tertiary educational institution, certain salient facts must be looked into, and these include, I will say, one, what types of graduates do you want to more or less produce for the outside world, your level of research, and then, of course, the kind of scholarships and student welfare you also have in place, and then your level and the skills of your academic boards or your academic faculties, as the case may be. Coupled with that is also the kind of infrastructure that you bring into the space. Taking it for granted that, as it's common knowledge, putting together funding for education sometimes can be very challenging, more so when education is basically, to a very large extent, a social enterprise venture more than any other thing. Of course, there are profit-making tertiary institutions, but at the same time, we know that the conditions that affect both the profit-making, the private, and also the non-profit and the social enterprise, sometimes they are very similar, though in law their constitution or the constitution of their boards would necessarily be different. So in setting out to start a tertiary institution, whether private or public, it will be great to start at the point of more or less understanding the caliber of graduates that tertiary institution wants to bring to the market. The first thing I would ordinarily advise, in my consulting capacity as the chief executive of Perennial Doxa Consulting, to institutions that are virtually coming to the market for the first time, I would say to them that, look, ensure that you begin by coming into some understanding or some MOUs, agreements with the companies and public organizations in your space. How that works is simple. You could walk up to the HRO of the various organizations or establishments, as the case may be, and ask them directly and say, for example, what caliber of graduates and what are the levels of competencies or areas of competencies that you require for particular roles in your organization. Now, what that does for your graduates immediately is that immediately they are employable. And like you very well know, from the foundation of having gotten their first jobs on exit of the universities, then they can make up their minds, whether they want to return back to academics, or they want to just, continue, in industry, or better still, go divert into areas, which, are of personal interest to them. That is to say, in private business. So it's a good thing to, it's strategic rather, to have companies more or less waiting for your graduates. Take that into consideration before you start. And then secondly, the kind of research you produce, the kind of research findings, the kind of research you undertake, expectedly, this will come mostly at the postgraduate levels. But it's important and imperative to note at this point in time that there are quite a couple of development labs all around the world who will be interested in your research findings. So you could make it a duty to ensure that you liaise with, appropriate research labs. Some could be government within the country, or private labs outside the country who might be interested in your research, and your research findings. If you come to agreement with them, you'll also discover that you're able to get adequate funding to fund most, or if not all, the essential parts of your research as much as is possible. So take a look at that as one of the means by which you can, attract funding to your institution. Like we said at the beginning, when companies outside your institution, organizations outside your tertiary institution are interested in your graduates, it becomes a bit easy to speak to them about scholarships. And that brings us to scholarships, and students' welfare. Now, for students' welfare and scholarship, we have to take, very close note of the fact that quite a couple of students who come to our tertiary institutions might just not be able to pay for, their education. And in doing that and in recognizing that fact, we have to understand that there needs to be, financial aid for, those who require it, and then also as an incentive to bright and well-performing students. In getting students into the institution, when scholarships to an extent are assured, it helps in lifting or rising the numbers of students who come into those institutions. And there are quite a couple of ways of funding those scholarships. You could be looking at things like gala events, where, in an appropriate social setting, the ideals of your tertiary institution are made known, to a group of guests. Could be large in number, could be small in number, but the ultimate objective is to get influential and well-to-do members of society to more or less, take a position in funding certain student positions in your institution. You can also get scholarships, from grants, which are directed particularly at students in specific fields. So you might just need to be able to search. You need to rather search for those grants. Penel Doxa Consulting, we assist in searching, for those grants. And then we have the use of endowments. Endowments can be particularly put in place to cater for certain departments or certain levels of students, and that is talking about their year in the institution. And these endowments, of course, the earlier they are started, the better, because when they are put together, these endowments grow over a period of time, and according to the tenets of that agreement setting up the endowment, the university will be entitled to 5% of, the gross sum every year to use, for particular reasons, which will, of course, include scholarships and other assistance for the student group. And then you look at getting scholarships and help for the students going through applying directly to foundations and trusts. In this particular instance, these will be more or less unsolicited. There will be unsolicited requests for scholarships and other assistance that the students require, especially those who actually need them, who come from the lower stratum of society, so to say, talking about the income earnings of their guardians or their parents. So when you have available, a register of both foreign and local trusts to whom you can, make the appropriate application for scholarships, you are sure of, pulling in quite a couple, to help your students. And talking about academia, for academia, we have to understand that it's wonderful to put in place a well-qualified academic faculty in all instances. And to be able to do that successfully, we should be able to also link up with various sectors of industry who can sponsor certain departments. So I put it this way. Let's assume, for example, that your university is able to get a strong mechatronics department in place. And in doing that, you have put that mechatronics department in place, most probably because in the neighborhood of your university, there is a car assembly plant somewhere, a few kilometers down the road or, outside the city, as the case may be. You can see that it becomes a wonderful blend when the mechatronics department of the school goes over to the car production plant for the purposes of having them endow certain lecturership chairs, professorial chairs, as the case may be, or to sponsor certain aspects in the department. And these could also have to do with machines. The reason why the car company will want to help you is because they know that they can have more or less access to your graduates to come into their company to work. And because they can ascertain the quality of graduates you are producing, then they are happy to have them come to work with them. So let's look at that, as a very more or less strong consideration in starting a tertiary institution. We must be able to sign MOUs, agreements, come to some levels of understanding with certain sectors, of industry and, certain groups and organizations, for that matter, who can sponsor certain departments in our various institutions. And of course, we also can use galas, to raise funding for academia, and crowdfunding is also another very interesting and rewarding tool to use to raise funding for our academic faculties and boards. And then finally, let's look at infrastructure. Infrastructure, of course, could benefit from most of the areas we've already mentioned. We could look at building adequate infrastructure with relating with development labs, relating with institutions that will use our research findings. We could decide to meet up with them and say, what, we can put up a lecture theater in appreciation, for what you're doing, in our midst. We can name a lecture theater after you, we can name a laboratory after you. And, of course, some of those which you properly call endorsements, inspire industry to do more on the one hand, and on the other, it helps to bring their own brand visibility to the fore. It's more or less like a transactional donor relationship. When they help and assist your institution to get certain levels of infrastructure and equipment, these organizations that help you also get recognition. So it works both ways. Infrastructure could also, be put in place by the establishment or, the organizing of gala events, which, like we said previously, can be an occasion where, the well-to-do in society come together to more or less donate to your cause. And then, of course, we look at the very important aspect of it, which is setting up both local and foreign endowment funds offices. So, in summary, if you want to start a tertiary institution in Sub-Sahara Africa, or better still, if your organization, your group, your entity have come together to start one, you should be looking at producing graduates specifically for industry. You should be looking at producing research specifically for development labs and various aspects of industry. You should be looking at putting in place scholarships and student welfare programs which will virtually more or less enlarge your student population, and also ensuring that academia, your academic board for that matter, is well resourced and well remunerated. And these, like we said earlier on, would come basically from the fundraising initiatives such as establishing endowment funds for lecturership chairs and professorial chairs, as the case may be. This brings us to the very important aspect of developing endowment funds for tertiary institutions in Sub-Sahara Africa. Allow me to say that endowment funds stand as a very clear indication of how long a university will exist. The reason today why we hear of the Harvards and the Yales and the Cambridges and the Oxfords, doing well and continuing to do well is because so many years ago, some of them a couple of hundreds of years ago, in the case of Cambridge, as much as in the 16th, 17th century, they started their endowments, which have grown to a very large extent today. We'll be talking specifically on the size of such endowments and the advantages they bring to both student body, academia, and then society at large as we go on in the subsequent lectures. Thank you for your time with us in this lecture today. I am Reva Ogo, the Chief Executive of Pedial Doxa Consulting. Do well to follow us on all our social media handles. Join us. Also check on our website for regular uploads of various teaching videos and information about grants, scholarships, and assistance which tertiary institutions in Sub-Sahara Africa would also benefit from to a very large extent. Thank you.